This morning, we're talking to Elisa Gasperini, who's the Director of Sustainability and Social Responsibility for Ahlsell in Norway. Now, Ahlsell is a Nordic-wide company, a huge company providing supplies to the building trade, such as electricians and plumbers. It has 7,500 employees and more than 300 stores. The last turnover I could find was 50 billion Swedish kroner, which is roughly 4.6 billion US dollars. So a very big concern indeed. Elisa's had quite an amazing globe-trotting career so far. But I will start by asking you, Elisa, how and why did you first become involved in sustainability?
Yes, well, thanks, Gareth. Yes, so I started originally, I was in the international development field, working with projects internationally. And then I ended up taking this sort of Norwegian business school master's program called Green Growth. And it was actually the first time it was offered back in 2014. And we, in fact, had one of your books as part of our reading list, The Green Executive, which was very, very, very useful and relevant to this kind of job. And during that course, I actually realized that this could be a possible career path. Like, I didn't really think that, is sustainability like a thing you can kind of do, and in particular working within sort of the corporate sphere. So I actually decided then and there after that course to actually apply for a job within this, and it's just been such an interesting journey. It's been, you know, from sustainability being just the sideline, this little department doing reporting on behalf of the company while, you know, the company's making money, to now becoming an integral part of business strategy, basically. Yeah. So I was originally in the packaging industry and 7 years, and now I've been now on Ahlsell for about 2.5 years. So I sort of switched industries, but it's still relevant things going on there too.
And is that the progression you've seen in the job role since you started from sort of ISO 14001 level up to, you know, much more strategic?
That's what I've seen. I've really seen this sort of maturity staircase of, okay, just compliance and reporting and having like this glossy report and something nice on your website, to actually how is that going to be measured within the business itself. So that's something that I found has been more and more prominent, that you've seen that it's actually increasing the value of the company as well to work with this, not just something to do the right thing, so to speak. So I think it's just part, and I think every sustainability professional is experiencing that too, to a certain degree. And right now it just feels like everyone wants a piece of you, kind of like, oh, come to my meeting and be here. Like, you're really kind of welcome with open arms, which it just wasn't the case like 10 years ago, in my experience at least.
You might have been asked, what are you doing here?
Exactly. Who are you again?
So, you know, you've touched on that already, but what are the main drivers on the business to embrace sustainability? You know, where is that pressure coming from?
It is coming from all corners. It's coming from our owners. We're owned by a private equity company. It's coming from our customers, and it's also coming from our suppliers. We have many thousands of suppliers working with products to do with everything you mentioned, from protective clothing, tools to cables, pipes, municipalities as well. It's coming from all areas. And what's really interesting, in particular in the sort of the construction infrastructure industry, that apart from having, you know, companies setting science-based targets, which we see now, for example, in Norway, that state-owned companies are actually required to set science-based targets. Right. So you see the push coming from there, but it's really just also just from a practical perspective. When you're actually calculating a project, you need to know what the sort of the CO2 figure is at project level. So really the whole life cycle information that comes from the product, which you then, you know, see that the main part of the CO2 emissions come from the products that you use in such a project.
So it sounds like there's quite a requirement on the business for data.
Oh, yes. It is so, and I think that the building industry, construction in general, I mean, it's been well known, this sort of, oh, but we need more digitalization, we need to have more efficiencies, and even in, let's say, a market that there's maybe more recession within the building industry, maybe less new buildings, but more renovation, for example. You know, you'd think there'd be sort of less focus on it, but it's actually even more focus, which I think is, it really helps that it's driven by the business demand, and it's not just something that's kind of like a compliance thing. I think that also helps to change hearts and minds within the organization as well. Like, we could win business because of this. The other key thing that we have in Norway has is leading the way, I would say, in on some of these things. Like, for example, from 1st of January, 30% of a public procurement tender has to have climate and environment weighting.
Yes.
30%, and that's like a requirement now. Like, it's not just, oh, would it be nice to have? Yeah. And the other change that we've had is we've already implemented the Transparency Act, which is basically the pre-version of the CSDD, Due Diligence Directive, where we have to show how we follow up human rights in the supply chain and working conditions. So we've already had like a dry run now of our first report and follow up of the OECD guidelines for due diligence. So really, we're sort of we're finding that we're, even within a Nordic context, we seem to be quite ahead on these demands that we're seeing. So it's big market demands. So
there's a whole mix there. If I could pick out a couple of things. First of all, the 30%. Obviously, that's a win or lose percentage. It's not just a sort of edge upwards slightly in the tender process if you're slightly better than one of your opponents. It's 30% is really critical to success in tendering then.
Absolutely. And I think that now we're sort of waiting for more guidelines, because there are so many ways you can actually measure sustainability at a product level or at a project level, or is it also including circularity, that kind of thing. So I think it will be measured in different ways, but it's definitely will be beyond like, are you ISO 14001 certified? Yes, no, I think everyone can kind of reach that now, and it's, and then the realization that it's really the products and services you're buying that is the biggest CO2.
Way beyond ticking boxes. The other thing then that you said that interests me was pressure coming from suppliers, because we normally think of supply chain sustainability as sort of going down from the purchaser, but I'm intrigued at how that manifests itself in terms of upward pressure from the suppliers themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, we have some leading, suppliers of manufacture of, tools, for example, or cables, etc. I mean, they have very high sustainability ambitions, several that have SBTi commitments and targets, for example. So they're wanting to really, showcase their products as well, of like, we've got the right documentation, we've got EPD, CO2 footprint information at a product level. How will that be shown on your website? So it's coming from them as well, and it's not just sort of this top down. And that's where it's really important to have really sort of a partnership approach with the suppliers, but also with customers, that it's not just kind of like, hey, do as I say. It's like we have to work with this together.
Yes, and sort of what can you do for us, as opposed to, we're going to send out auditors and the policing side of things. So you mentioned targets in the public sector, but from your business point of view, what targets what sort of headline targets are you working to?
Absolutely. So now committed to science-based targets. We really see it as sort of a gold standard of setting in particular climate-based targets, because we had, I think every company goes through this previously, more sort of relative targets based on sort of increased profit and the CO2 going down per dollar earned kind of thing, which I think those days are kind of numbered. I mean, not having an absolute cut in emissions, I think that's sort of the big change there. And So we've committed now to science-based targets, and we're just finalizing now the final targets. But what's really important for us is that we actually commit to the 1.5 degree pathway. So, not 2 degrees, which means a much more drastic cut. And because now in my previous company, in the packaging company, we also committed several years before, and it was easier to set science-based targets then. You could have like a supplier engagement target, and that was check, fine, for scope 3. Now it's like you actually have to have a target for scope 3 as well. So we're going to have quite an ambitious target for scope 3, and that is 99% of our emissions. That's the products and services we purchase and the use of sold products to our customers. And that really is the sort of penny dropping moment when you realize that that's the business opportunity as well, being able to show how these products have an impact in a life cycle on the project, being able to give the choice to customers of what kind of materials they can use, for example. So that's really our guiding star is SBTI. And then the other thing that we use is EcoVadis, which is this sort of international rating, which is on the 4 parameters. That is, responsible sourcing, compliance, and human rights, and working conditions, and environment. And that at the moment we have a platinum on that, so we're really excited. But we're like, hell, can we keep it? Because each year it gets harder and harder to achieve, which I think is really, really good. I'm like, so I think personally, it's really good to have a third-party certification of your sustainability work. It's kind of like everyone saying they're so great. To me, you really need some. So that's why SBTI and EcoVadis, those are the sort of the tools that we use. And there's lots of others out there, other things and other ratings you can use. But we've just decided to sort of focus on those for the moment.
Yes, well, I've seen businesses sign up for too many and then spend much of their time reporting the same data in different formats and not getting anything done.
But there's also one specific goal that we have, and this is also in particular for Norway, because Norway has a high sort of electrification rate of cars, highest in the world. So there's a real sort of focus to sort of electrify the fleet, not just for cars, but also for trucks and logistics. And logistics is one of our biggest parts of our business. We basically every day send out 50 trucks from our logistics centre all over Norway, shipping products to be used on projects. So we actually had quite a sort of a goal to actually cut our emissions much earlier than 2030. So we sort of actually set our own sort of goal there, where we wanted to, back in 2021, cut our emissions in 2024 to be not quite emission-free. I can talk a little about that, how that's hard to measure, but we wanted to at least cut 70% of our emissions for all our logistics going out to customers. So making that commitment, and then towards being completely emission-free. And here we have some sort of technological issues regarding, we have long distances, we have cold climates, an electric truck at the moment can't go everywhere, and we have charging, not enough charging stations, things like that, so we have to use biogas. And so we have biogas, and we have HVO 100, a biodiesel that we use as well. And the interesting thing was that we just went out with quite a bold goal, and then we said, well, look, we're definitely going to cut by 70% within 2 years, have that done, and we're going to try and get as close as we can to 100. And that got a lot of really good, we got a lot of support for that, because we were kind of bold enough to actually push our transport suppliers to like, what can you do within 2 years and not by 2030? So that was a very... that was a way of actually trying to move the dial into a quicker emission reduction than 2030, which seems so far away into the future.
Well, my next question was going to be about the challenges you face, but you've already mentioned the fact that 99% of your footprint is in scope 3, so supply chain or the use of your products, and then the issues with logistics. Do those, because you've already mentioned those, do those rate as your biggest challenges, or do you find other serious challenges in meeting those targets?
Well, I think that the thing that I'm realizing now with target setting, and especially sort of CO2 target setting, that equally important is actually the business development side. Like, how can we create more, for example, circular business models with our customers that complements that? Because if we kind of just always talk about it, oh, the products, they're the biggest part of our CO2, it's not really motivating for also internally. So that's where we're really seeing that it is complemented by the circular business development, where we actually have more, for example, take back schemes from customer to and back to our supplier. That's something that we're involved in piloting, so that we have actual reuse in the building industry. So that's something that we're seeing is becoming more and more relevant. So that would be, and I think that's where you get also this internal excitement internally, where, oh wow, there's new sort of business development things that we can be working on to create value and to increase the value in our services, and not just on the selling of products and margin, which is sort of how a traditional retailer, measures itself. It's based on the amount of products sold and margin.
And are you getting a strong response from your customers to that circular economy push?
Yes, definitely. We see that there are certain customers that are more mature than others on this front, but that's where we feel we're quite sort of strategically placed as a sort of a retailer, wholesale retailer or distributor between the customer and the supplier. Then we can kind of connect the two. So that's something that we're really seeing can be sort of good leverage for us moving forward, because with all this legislation coming and CSRD and all the reporting, when it comes to sort of documentation and knowing, okay, what's actually happened to my product that I sent, I sold through Ahlsell, what ended up, which building did it end up in? I want it back, like send it back to me. That's where it's seeing the business value of that, how we can actually help that journey.
That's what sprung to mind is obviously buildings aren't, or rarely built for in the short term. They're built for decades. The building I'm sat in is about 2.5 times older than I am. So that seems like quite a challenge to do circular economy in that, compared to food packaging, for example, where the product is used very quickly and can be returned back into the loop.
Absolutely. No, there's much more value actually in the product itself, and when you look at even the amount of materials from sort of steel and plastic or copper. I mean, these are highly valued products, and we want to sort of retain that value the longest, and then you need to increase really the product's life to make that sort of embed that CO2 in there also and have a long life.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So of all those, you've sort of talked about quite a few ventures and things. What would you say was your biggest achievement or your favorite case study of your work at Ahlsell?
I think one of the things is this transport project that we did, and I would like to highlight the necessity to work across the company. So I mean, we have a logistics division. It's not just them doing it, it is the sales as well. Like, how can we then position this towards the market? And then we have, sustainability, and then there's communication. What can we say? And so really having this cross collaboration across functions.
Yeah.
And that to me is really what, and I get such joy of working with this, like every day, just getting people to talk to each other, setting up meetings with cross-functional people. You really can come quite far. It's just, and you mentioned it in your book, the green Jujitsu principle of change your messaging depending on who you're talking to. I mean, I use that all the time.
Oh, great.
So, okay, well, if it's finance you want, if it's business cases, this version. If it's the increased reputation, see here, look, we're on this website and we're here. So and it is so versatile. Like, you can really show so many ways. So
I'm glad somebody's used it.
Oh, yeah, right. Definitely. It is so important. And I think that is the real, I mean, everyone in a sustainability function has different hats on and whatever. And I've worked in, different areas of, reporting, CO2 reporting and sustainability report and, recycling of products and things. But now my job, and in fact, I've now also the last year been part of the leadership team in Norway. So they sort of invited me into the leadership team, which meant that I could actually sit at the decision sort of table and see, okay, well, what's the strategy moving forward? To me, that was sort of the biggest sort of honor to be like invited, because then they see also the value of having a strategic, sustainable perspective on the normal day-to-day and also the strategic path moving forward.
Which takes us back to what we were talking about at the very start, was that, sustainability used to be in this little silo, and the sustainability manager would just get shoved all these problems to solve whereas now you clearly have worked your way into being seen as a solution rather than a problem. Yeah. Sorry, no.
But I still get, there's still, everyone has a different viewpoint. You still get some people that are very skeptical. How are we going to make money on this? This sounds expensive. But you know what? For every day that passes, there are less of those kind of dissenting voices.
Yeah.
It's like, they're kind of, dying away, because it's you really start to see the business value in it. And I even had one slide that I used internally where I just had some pictures of some of the fora we've been invited to, and there was this conference here, and we've been here, and it's like, how much is this worth in kroner, as we have krona, The thing that I'm really excited about now and thinking about a lot is how can we show that this is the value of sustainability and strategic focus on sustainability in our spreadsheets, like the way we actually measure our sort of economic profit. So that's something that I'm trying to get more and more into.
Yeah.
Like, how can you show it online? How can you make it relevant for the CFO and for the finance functions? Obviously, this will change moving forward. With CSRD coming in, and sustainability non-financial reporting will be more equal to financial reporting. But until then, you're still stuck with the issue that you are actually measuring just how many products you're selling and the margins, and like that's the sort of bread and butter. So that's something that's really made me interested in sort of the economic side. That's where I'm sort of going more and more into now. Like that's
Well, if you were going to move on to a new opportunity, and you were doing a handover to somebody who was coming into your position fresh, what would your advice be to them?
I think the biggest advice I would give would be to be yourself, and don't be scared to kind of raise an issue, like to put it up on the table. And I think it's just part of just growing, maturing as well in your career. Like previously, I've maybe been more sort of a bit more quiet and diplomatic. And now it's like, if you actually say, hey, but what about this? Have you thought about it in 5 years? Like, even though it might be a little bit unpopular, just don't be scared of just saying it, because they actually appreciate a different viewpoint.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I recently went through some diversity leadership training, and just it dawned upon me, this whole being able to be yourself and bring your full self to work, no matter who you are, what your background is, your education, being able to thrive and blossom in your role. It is like amazing what you can do when you have that opportunity. And that's what I feel I have had in this role, that I've just been given so much sort of room to blossom.
Yeah.
And that's what I would say to the next person, that not that I'm going anywhere or anything, but and that's how I feel with my team as well.
Well, I think that's
pass on that, be yourself.
I think that's a great place to finish, because I think, through this interview, you've demonstrated why I was so keen to for you to take part in one of these interviews. Your passion, your clarity, and your ability to communicate what you're doing is superlative. So thank you very much for all those insights.
You're welcome. And I look forward to reading your next book that comes out on sustainability development, which changes, almost from month to month, doesn't it? It's so exciting, such an exciting field.
Yes, it's never dull. So thank you very much.